Greetings, my name's Ethan. I'm 24 years old and hail from a small Indiana town. A few months ago, I moved to this tranquil suburb to begin anew. My hometown life was intricate. I labor as a mechanic at a local shop. Although it's not glamorous, I relish repairing things. There's something authentic about it. See the damaged, get your hands dirty, and mend it. Initially, I knew no one upon arrival here. Typically, my evenings consisted of just me, my humble rental house, a frozen pizza, and the sound of passing vehicles. I wasn't in pursuit of anything. I presumed life would simply reassemble bit by bit, like an old engine. But sometimes, life takes you by surprise when you least expect it. This happened on a Saturday afternoon. The sun was relentless, and the air was heavy with humidity from the morning rain. I was returning from the hardware store with a bag filled with tools for a side project when I spotted her. A woman was in the neighboring yard, kneeling by a flower bed, struggling with a leaky garden hose that was spraying water everywhere, soaking her clothes. Despite this, she seemed determined. I might have continued walking to avoid being seen as a nuisance, but something about her caught my attention. She didn't seem just annoyed. There was a sense of melancholy about her, as if she carried the burden of the world. I called out, offering help with my tool bag in hand. Startled, she looked up, her blue eyes reflecting uncertainty. For a moment, she seemed unsure whether to trust me or ask me to leave. Then, she nodded slowly. "Yes," she whispered, sounding tired. "That would be helpful." I made my way across the yard and knelt beside her, quickly repairing the leak and tightening the hose connector. A straightforward fix. Dear friends, please help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. Please like and subscribe to our channel. It will motivate us to make more videos like this for you. When I handed back the hose, she gave me a small smile that seemed confined to her lips. "Thank you," she said. "No problem," I replied, rubbing my hands on my jeans. "I'm Ethan, by the way, new neighbor from down the street." She considered for a moment before introducing herself as Samantha. We stood in an uncomfortable silence for a brief while. She fiddled with the hose, seeming undecided about speaking further or retreating back inside her home. I feigned ignorance of her hesitation by glancing over my shoulder. I suggested that if she needed any repairs done around here, I was quite handy and could be easily summoned. Samantha nodded again, but I knew she wasn't the type to ask for help willingly. She radiated both pride and pain. As I prepared to leave, I observed a glint on her left hand, a wedding ring. It caused my chest to constrict slightly. I wasn't privy to her story, but it was evident that something was amiss. No man was in sight. Her eyes held sorrow. She seemed partly absent, as if a piece of her was somewhere else entirely. I chose not to inquire. Instead, I retraced my steps towards home, casting furtive glances over my shoulder. There she stood, her hose limp in her hands, watching me depart. She flashed a brief smile. This time, I returned the gesture, albeit subtly, small, almost shy, but sincere. That night, as I sat on my back porch, sipping a cold beer and listening to the chirping crickets, I found myself lost in thought about that smile. She exuded an air of loneliness, hinting at the unforeseen connection between two damaged individuals. Unbeknownst to me then, that slight cracked opening signaled the beginning of something unexpected. The subsequent days slipped by uneventfully. Samantha and I crossed paths a few times from afar. We exchanged no words during her gardening chores, pulling weeds and carrying food indoors. I didn't want to intrude. A sense of sorrow hung heavy around her, the kind that shuns companionship, the type that grief usually cloaks. Each time I passed her house, something inexplicably attracted me. Maybe it was the graceful way she seemed to be restrained by unseen bonds. Or perhaps it was merely the enigmatic smile she offered me on our first encounter, a memory that haunted me more than I cared to acknowledge. One twilight, as dusk approached, I spotted her struggling once more. She was attempting to mend one of the decayed steps leading towards her porch. It could have been treacherous if she continued using it. She stooped with a hammer in hand, displaying signs of frustration and exhaustion. For an instant, I hesitated before crossing the road. "Hello?" I called out. "You might injure yourself doing that." She glanced up, sweeping her hair away from her face with the back of her hand. "It's all right," she replied almost automatically. "But it isn't." "Allow me to help," I responded, placing my tool bag down before she could protest. Two hands are more efficient than one. This time, she didn't resist. She stepped aside and settled on the upper step, drawing her knees towards her chest while watching me work in quiet contemplation. The repair was straightforward. A few planks and several nails were all it took. Yet, her eyes, heavy with sadness, seemed to follow my every move. "Is this your profession?" she asked softly. "In a way," I replied, flashing a small smile. "I'm a mechanic. Repairs have been my forte since childhood. It seems it has become a part of me." She nodded, tugging at her sleeve as if she felt the cold, despite the warm weather outside. Upon completion, I stood up and wiped away sweat from my brow. "Here you go, good as new. It should support you for now." I assumed our brief encounter was over. Another polite thank you, another lonely journey home. But then came an unexpected question. "Would you care for some lemonade? I've just brewed some." A smile spread across my face. "Certainly. The suggestion sounds wonderful," she said. Yet the stillness within her house felt denser, echoing with emptiness, as if the very structure were holding its breath. The living room was orderly, but hints of storytelling lingered. A folded American flag and a glass case on the mantel. A wedding photo of Samantha and a man in uniform. Their youthful radiance and vitality shone through, his arm protectively around her shoulders. Her gaze met mine as I stared at the photograph, and she murmured, "That's my husband." A hint of sorrow softened her voice as she placed two glasses on the coffee table. "I was in a car accident 6 weeks ago," she admitted, looking down at her hands. I wasn't sure what to say. I found myself unable to come up with words, so I simply sat opposite her, taking a sip of overly sweet lemonade that left a tangy burn in my chest. We remained silent for a while, merely sitting. Samantha chuckled lightly, her laughter sounding dry and somewhat bitter. "I'm afraid I'm not great company at the moment," she said. "You are all right," I replied. "There's no need to be anything." She looked at me doubtfully, unsure if to trust my words or not. She stated, "People keep telling me it's past time to move on." "As if mourning can be scheduled," I responded spontaneously. "There isn't," I added. "Some things stay with you forever. You just learn to bear them." For a moment she seemed on the verge of tears, but then she didn't. Instead, she merely nodded faintly. I drank my lemonade and prepared to leave, not wanting to outstay my welcome. I told her that if she ever needed anything, all she had to do was knock, and she showed me to the door. Stepping outside, she softly whispered, "Thank you, Ethan." I rotated and smiled. "Feel free to reach out to me anytime, Samantha." The door resoundingly closed behind me, though it seemed less burdensome than previously. That evening, as I reclined in bed, her image persistently lingered, small yet sturdy, battling every single day to persevere. I was uncertain about the future. I hadn't devised any plans. I didn't wish to hasten her, repair her, or be a substitute. Yet, deep within, I recognized that my role as a neighbor had evolved. Something transpired between the fractured porch and her living room's quietude, and for the first time since settling here, I no longer felt isolated. Suddenly, a tempest emerged, a late summer storm in the Midwest, fierce, boisterous, and wrathful, characterized by an uncommon greenish sky and charged air. Seated at the window, I partially observed the raindrops hitting the glass when I spotted it. Samantha's garage door was violently swaying in the wind, precariously balanced on its hinges. Impulsively, I snatched my coat and sprinted over the road. My boots made splashes in the puddles that had formed. Upon reaching her porch, I pounded on the door. "Samantha," I shouted above the wind's roar, "that's your garage." A second later, the door swung open. Samantha, wearing jeans and a worn sweater, stood there barefoot with wet hair clinging to her face. "I comprehend," she yelled back, trying to be heard. I couldn't close it. "Stay indoors," I instructed, gesturing for her to retreat. "I'll handle it." Before she could protest, I darted into the garage. The wind resisted me at every step, pulling at the door as if trying to tear it off completely. I battled it back into position, wedging a piece of wood in the frame for support. It wasn't elegant, but it would hold until the storm passed. When I reached her porch, I was drenched, water trickling from my hair and garments. Samantha stood there holding a towel. She looked at me with an unusual mix of admiration and embarrassment. "You're insane," she said, suppressing a chuckle. "Yes," I replied, shivering. "Thank you." She stepped aside to let me in, and I made no objection. The storm outside grew more intense by the second. Thunder roared outside the windows, and the lights flickered momentarily before stabilizing into a dim, unsettling light. "Here," she instructed, handing me the towel. "Sit near the heater," she suggested. I removed my boots and followed her into the living room, leaving a trail of water behind. She vanished to the rear and reappeared a minute later with a sweater and sweatpants. "They might be a bit large," she noted as she passed them over, "but at least they are dry." I made no argument. I entered the bathroom, took off my soaked clothes, and changed. The clothes bore a faint scent of her, clean and slightly lavender tinted. Upon my return, Samantha sat huddled on the couch beneath a blanket, her legs tucked into her chest. She seemed small and vulnerable. I took my place in the armchair opposite, uncertain of what to do or say. For several minutes, we only listened. The storm raging outside, its rain drumming on the roof, and the occasional rumble of thunder shaking the house. Then, to my surprise, she spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm too young to be a widow," she confided. I stared at her. There were no tears, no glances in my direction. She seemed lost in thought, staring out the window where the rain veiled the scenery beyond. I remained silent, only listening. She pulled the shawl tighter around herself. "People think I'm strong," she conceded softly. "They tell me, 'You'll find someone else,' or 'Since you're young, you'll move on.' As though it were that straightforward." I said nothing in response. Her words were heavy with despair, raw and unfiltered. "I don't wish to continue," she confessed, "yet I can't endure this void either." I inched forward in my seat, careful not to frighten her, but eager to assure her of my presence. Her eyes met mine, glistening with unshed tears, but no tears fell yet. Instead, she whispered faintly, almost inaudibly, "Could you stay with me tonight?" It was not a desperate plea, nor an impassioned entreaty. It was simply human, sincere, and real. There was no underlying physical connotation, no hint of the unexpected. "It's about companionship," I acknowledged. With a steady voice, I responded, "I will stay." She offered a weak, fragile smile that pierced my heart more deeply than any other pain. I moved to the couch and sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. She cautiously drew closer, as if uncertain of my intentions, but I did not recoil. We encircled her shoulders with my arm, and she nestled her head on my torso. We remained in this position for a considerable duration, both listening to the tumultuous storm outside. Neither of us spoke, nor made any commitments. Instead, we shared a silent bond, two broken souls trying to hold each other up. I noticed her breaths becoming slower. Her body grew more relaxed over time. For the first time since my relocation here, and perhaps for both of us, the world seemed less harsh. We were merely two individuals sheltering in the midst of a tempest, finding solace in one another. Despite the raging storm, Samantha's living room felt tranquil and peaceful. She hadn't stirred in a while. Her head remained on my chest. I could sense her shallow breaths, which eventually deepened and became regular. I dared not move myself. It wasn't about comfort. It was about finding the right spot. Minutes morphed into hours without me even noticing, as we both found ourselves exactly where we needed to be. Samantha barely stirred when the room trembled slightly with the occasional thunderclap. I instinctively wrapped my arm around her, shielding her as though my protection could ward off whatever burden she held within. At one point, the power failed, and the lamps dimmed before going dark, replaced by only the soft glow of the fireplace and flickers of distant lightning through the windows. The darkness didn't bother me. It felt right somehow. Her breaths grew heavier against my chest, not from fear, but exhaustion. She needed rest, and I did too. Someone to lean on for one night. Throughout the evening, I stayed awake, listening to the tempest outside, watching the intermittent flashes of lightning illuminate the room. Occasionally, Samantha would tighten her grip around me, even while asleep. She was smaller than expected, delicate, vulnerable, like something fragile that might shatter if mishandled. Yet beneath that fragility was hidden resilience, an unyielding resolve. I'm not certain how long we sat there, perhaps through the whole night or merely for a few hours. Time held no significance. Eventually, the storm abated around sunrise, its thunder receding into a distant hum and raindrops tapping softly on the windows. It was then that Samantha stirred. She shifted against me and awakened slowly. For an instant, she seemed bewildered, as if she had forgotten her surroundings or why she wasn't alone. Then her gaze fell upon me. Her disheveled hair obscured her face, swollen from slumber, and a shift in her eyes became apparent. It was embarrassment, guilt. Swiftly, she sat up and tugged the blanket more tightly around herself. "I am sorry," she murmured, her voice husky with sleep and something more profound. "I did not intend to." "Don't," I whispered soothingly. She looked at me in surprise. "There is no need for an apology," I said. "Not because you require someone?" For a lengthy moment, she just gazed at me, uncertain if she could trust it or if it was safe to believe it. Her lips trembled slightly, and she hastily glanced away, wiping her eyes with her sweatshirt sleeve. "I'm not skilled at this," she whispered, suppressing a giggle. "I'm not accustomed to needing someone." "Indeed," I replied softly. "I too am unfamiliar with the role. Allow me a faint but genuine smile." She rose, enveloping herself in the blanket as if it were a cape. "I'll prepare some coffee," she declared. "Would you like some? I could use a lot of it." I jested and she laughed. This time I chuckled sincerely, softly, and lightly. I observed her venture into the kitchen, barefoot, with the blanket trailing behind. She moved hesitantly as if her body was slowly recalling how to be alive. I remained on the couch, sensing a shift within me. Not pity, not an obligation. Something more subtle, powerful, respect, admiration, concern. By the time she reappeared with 2 mugs, the sky had adopted a pale gray hue, hinting at dawn's approach. She handed me a cup and sat opposite me, her legs tucked under a blanket. We drank in quiet companionship for several moments. It wasn't strange, it was soothing. It reminded me of the tranquility one shares with someone when speech is superfluous. After some time, she spoke once more. "You don't need to stay," she said softly. "There are likely tasks requiring your attention." I shook my head. Nothing is more important than this. She gave a small, thoughtful smile as she looked at her mug. "You pose a threat," she whispered tenderly. I quirked an eyebrow. "A danger?" "For someone like me," she clarified. "Someone who's still finding their footing." I moved closer and placed my coffee aside. "I'm not here to undermine you, Samantha," I said. "I'm here to aid you if you choose." Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time she didn't wipe them away. Instead, she allowed the silent, gentle drops to fall. And when at last she put down her mug and reached for my hand, it felt profoundly sacred. Her fingers initially felt frozen and trembled slightly, yet I held them gently. No pressure, no haste. Allow her to set the pace. We remained there, hands intertwined, as the world around us began to stir. I wasn't certain about what tomorrow would bring, or if she might distance herself again due to fear. However, for now, she was not alone, and neither was I. The following weeks felt altered. At first, it was subtle, like Samantha waving at me from her porch after work or coming over to offer assistance when I worked on my truck. Small gestures, cracks in the barrier she had built around herself. I did not force the issue. I didn't chase after her. I simply remained present, a reliable presence, a sanctuary for her to rest against whenever she desired. Sometimes she was silent, lost in her own thoughts. Other times she smiled easily, her voice soothing and harmonious, as if she were learning to breathe once more. We often spent hours on her porch, sipping coffee and chatting about various topics. She shared stories of her husband James, their college meeting, building a life here, and the sudden end to it all. Her voice was filled with sorrow, but there was also a newfound acceptance. On a Saturday afternoon, we ventured to a tranquil park outside of town. Samantha packed a small picnic, and we laid out a blanket by the lake under a brilliant sun and soft breeze. A day untouched by the world's troubles. We remained there for hours, watching ducks glide over the river while discussing our future in a light-hearted, half-serious manner. Eventually, she fell silent, gazing out over the lake with a serious expression. Then, without looking at me, she took off her wedding ring. She held onto it for a while, spinning it gently. The sun's rays danced across the gold, creating sparks. "He will always be loved by me," she whispered tenderly. "A part of him will forever remain in me." There was no response from me. I knew she wasn't finished yet. However, she carried on with her voice slightly trembling. "There's still a great deal of life ahead, and I believe he would want me to live it fully." She pressed her palm against the ring, pressing it against her heart for a moment. After that, she delicately tucked it away into the small pocket of her bag and secured it. When our eyes met again, there were tears glistening in hers. Yet, there was something else. A glimmer of optimism. A genuine, stunning smile graced her lips that stirred a longing in my heart. "I'm prepared," she expressed. "If you are, there's no need to wait." I extended my hand and took hers, feeling the heat radiating from her skin and the steady rhythm of her pulse. "I've been ready too," I murmured. For hours, Samantha leaned on my shoulder while we observed the sun sink gradually over the sea. Our relationship wasn't like the ones in films. It was understated and tranquil, neither glamorous nor theatrical. It progressed slowly, at times difficult but genuine. There was no need to hasten things. Over the ensuing 6 months, we crafted something distinct, a unique way of coexisting. not a replacement for what she had lost, but something that acknowledged its existence and pushed forward. We spent our weekends renovating her house jointly. Our excursions began with hiking trails, exploring small villages, intentionally getting lost to extend our time together. We shared more laughter, and eventually, one night, under the porch light, I gave her a hesitant, gentle kiss on my way home. Later, far into the night, we talked about the future, envisioning a life together without forcing or rushing anything, just daydreaming. Samantha grasped my hand, whispering, "I'm grateful you spent the night." I reciprocated with a soft squeeze. "Indeed," I replied. There was no need for words after that. It wasn't about rescuing each other. It was about finding the courage to carry on and choosing to do so together. Not because we were damaged, but because we had found something worth restoring. Two individuals, two histories, one destiny. The storm has passed. The house felt warm once more, and for the first time in a while, Samantha and I were no longer merely existing. We were thriving,